the urinary system. We're going to talk about the general functions of the urinary system, how you make urine, and how it's regulated. We're going to talk about what's in urine and what should not be. And we're going to talk about how water and electrolyte balance are related. So you have two kidneys that regulate the amount of water in the body and therefore blood pressure. Because remember, increase in blood volume increases blood pressure. So your kidneys and your cardiovascular system are very closely tied. We're going to talk about the regulation of electrolytes, particularly sodium and calcium. We're going to talk about the regulation of pH. We're going to talk about how the kidneys remove waste, particularly nitrogen waste, but also any other breakdown products of like antibiotics or any other drugs you're taking, legal or otherwise. And the kidneys, we're going to talk about how it makes a couple of hormones. Vitamin D is one of the steps of the synthesis happens there. Erythropoietin and renin. Alright, so the anatomy of the urinary system is pretty simple. There are two kidneys attached to a bladder via the ureter or ureter. So you have two of those. And then you have a bladder which holds urine, and the tube leading to the outside is the urethra. The urethra is 5 times longer in the man because it goes through the penis, and it also carries sperm in the male. So it's also part of the reproductive system for men. The kidneys are held to the back wall of your body, so it's behind all your guts. They are shaped like kidney beans, and I don't know if they were named first or the bean was named first, but they do look a lot like that. They're kind of held there, it's called retroperitoneal, being behind the peritoneum, and they're held up there by connective tissue and fat. People who are anorexic will sometimes lose so much body fat that they'll lose the fat around the kidneys, and the kidneys can start to move around and float around, and you don't want them to move. You want them to kind of stay where they are. So the kidneys function to clean the blood, and urine formation can be weird, I guess, because one of the things that happens is when your blood goes through your kidneys, blood pressure pushes all of the stuff out of your blood into a capsule called the glomerulus, and it doesn't push blood cells. It's not supposed to, so you shouldn't have blood in your urine. But all the other stuff in your urine gets pushed into that capsule. And of course, some of the stuff you don't want to lose. Okay, you should never have glucose in your urine, for example, but glucose gets pushed out into the glomerulus and therefore into the kidney tubules. And the kidney tubules in this picture are the yellow part. And if you stay in the kidney tubules, eventually you get into the ureter, the bladder, the urethra, and the toilet. So while the first step is pushing everything out, most of the active function of the kidney is to pull the stuff back in that you want to keep. Okay? Anyway, blood with waste goes into the kidney, and what comes out is blood that has less waste. Not everything is removed every single time. And the waste part, or the stuff that you did pull out, ends up in the urine. The active or the functional unit of the kidney that does this work is called a nephron. Okay, so you should know what that word is. The nephron is the functional unit of the kidney. So blood is continuously going through the kidney, 1,500 gallons a day, I've heard. There's different measurements, enough to fill 30 bathtubs every day. So a lot. Your kidneys are really busy, and you don't feel it, right? You probably have never turned to the person next to you and say, my right kidney is just doing a bang-up job today. You don't feel it. Okay? And as the blood goes through, some of the waste, but not all of it, are removed each time. Okay? So it's not like 100% of the urea in your urine is removed every time the urine goes through. You're always going to have some urea in your blood. Again, the functional unit of the kidney is the nephron. That's what's doing this work. And there are 3 basic steps: glomerular filtration, where blood pressure pushes molecules into the kidney tubules. Tubular reabsorption, which is active transport or facilitated diffusion of the stuff you want to keep back into the blood. Step 3 is tubular secretion, which actively moves things from the blood back into the tubules so it ends up in the toilet. If you do just step 1, it's going to end up in the toilet. If you do step 2, it ends up back in the blood. And if you do step 3, it ends up in the toilet. Okay? What remains in the kidney tubules at the end after these steps is what's going to end up in the urine. Okay, so here's a picture of your kidney, and again, kind of a blow-up picture of a nephron. You have like 1 million of those, and if they're destroyed, you don't generally get them back. This particular website said 37 gallons of fluid a day, but you only make 1/4 to of urine, so most of the stuff comes back. Okay, so most of the blood you filter is simply returned to the body. Here's those 3 steps again. Glomerular filtration is based on blood pressure, and as the fluid goes into this capsule, the tube going in is bigger than the tube going out. So that creates some pressure in here, and materials in your blood are pushed out. The capsule catches it, and it starts to travel down the kidney tubules. As it travels down the first part of the nephron, tubular reabsorption occurs. That's step 2. And step 2 moves stuff back into the blood. Okay, and you can see the arrow here pushing stuff back into the blood. Then that goes through a loop and comes back up, and during the time it's in that loop, called the loop of nephron or the nephron loop, water is reabsorbed. And the last step, tubular secretion, is when some of the stuff in the blood gets put back into the tubules. And eventually these tubes meet the collecting ducts, which go down in the center of your kidney to the renal pelvis and eventually to the ureter. Remember, the ureter is the tube that takes urine from the kidney to the bladder. Anything left in the blood leaves the renal vein and goes back into the blood of circulation in the body. So what's in urine? And some of that depends on you and what you have consumed and how much water you have taken in that day. But it's 95% water, and then some of the nitrogen waste, which is our way of getting rid of nitrogen waste, is urine, and that mostly comes out in the form of urea. Uric acid and creatinine are also nitrogen waste. You have between 0.7 and 2.5 liters per day of urine. That really, again, depends on how much you drink. Pretty much what goes in has to come out. So if you drink 3 liters of fluid today, 3 liters of fluid is going to come out. Now, if it was a really hot day and you sweat a lot, some of it comes out in the form of sweat instead of urine. But maybe, like in the wintertime and you haven't really done a whole lot of exercise, urine volume is pretty close to intake volume. You're also going to have some other stuff in there, potassium, acids. The pH of urine ranges between 4.5 and 8, and most of the time it's acidic, which is good because the acid will kill any bacteria that might be in the urethra, because remember, the urethra is a tube that's open to the outside, and therefore bugs can crawl in. You should not have glucose or proteins or amino acids or blood in your urine. And we'll talk about that a little more when we talk about urinalysis. So from the kidney to the bladder is the tube called the ureter. You have 2 of them, one from each kidney. It produces mucus to protect itself from the acidic urine, and it keeps everything moving. Movement is done by peristalsis, which is smooth muscle contraction. So even if you stood on your head, urine would move from the kidneys to the bladder. Okay, it's not gravity or you jumping up and down that gets the urine to move there. It's peristalsis. And every once in a while, obstructions can cause kidney damage. Okay? And a kidney stone, if it was stuck right here, say in the ureter, then urine's going to back up and block urine production. It can sometimes get stuck in the urethra and prevent you from peeing, and that would be painful as well. And kidney stones can be incredibly painful, more painful than childbirth, according to some women. Okay, the urine goes from the ureter into the bladder. This is, of course, a hollow organ that can extend. Basically, it can expand to hold up to 600 milliliters. 600 milliliters is just over a bottle of water, but 150 in there is enough to make you feel like you gotta go. And there is a sphincter down here, it's called the internal urethral sphincter, that when the urine volume builds up enough, it's a trigger that makes you feel like you gotta go. And the external urethral sphincter down here is what you relax or open, I guess, to let urine out. So that's under voluntary control up to a point, right? Okay, and it takes a while to figure that out, which is why little kids are not born potty trained, because they need to figure out what it feels like to go and then voluntarily control the external urethral sphincter. In case you care, the fancy word for urination is micturition. Okay, so from the bladder to the outside is a tube called the urethra. It carries urine, and of course is also lined with mucous membranes to protect itself from the acidic urine. In men, it's 5 times longer because it goes through the penis, and it also carries sperm. Okay, well, the urethra, the tube from the outside of from the bladder to the outside of the body. All right, the second part of this is balancing water and pH, which the kidneys or the urinary system are kind of in charge of. Okay, so water and electrolyte balance are connected, and this goes back to osmosis. Hopefully you remember that from way back in Unit 3, but we've talked about it multiple times. Remember, water is always going to move to the side of the membrane where there's more dissolved stuff. And I like to think of it as salt sucks. Wherever the salt is, that's where the water wants to go. And in the kidney system or urinary system, wherever the electrolytes go, that's where the water goes. Okay, so if tubular reabsorption is putting electrolytes back into the blood, the water's going to follow and go back into the blood too. So pretty much if you actively transport sodium or potassium or calcium to one side of the membrane, the water will follow. So water and electrolyte balance are connected. You have 2 kinds of water in the body, water that's inside the cells and water that's outside the cells. Very creative, you got to be on one side or the other. Water inside the cells is cytoplasm, right? We've talked about there's fluid inside cells and organelles are floating around in there. And since you have 70 trillion cells, you actually have more water inside cells than you do outside, even though outside you have things like 5 liters of blood and a cup or 2 of cerebrospinal fluid, and you have lymph fluid, you have interstitial fluid. Okay, all of those fluids still don't add up to as much water as there is on the inside. Okay, 62 or 65% of your water is actually inside cells. Okay, so again, intake and output of water is about equal, because otherwise we would blow up or shrivel all the time. On average, and this is a very wildly varying average, you bring in 2.5 liters of fluid every day. And it doesn't mean you drink all of that. Remember, most food is mostly water. Watermelon is 95% water. Okay, so even when you have peanut butter and jelly sandwich, some of that peanut butter and jelly sandwich is water. And that's all counting here. So you get water from drinking and from eating, and a little bit more from metabolism. And how much you get kind of depends on your brain and sensing the amount of fluid in your body, and when you need more, your brain sends a signal to be thirsty and you usually go drink something. Output is about equal. Again, we don't blow up and shrivel every day. We lose fluid via the urine mostly, but also fecal matter, sweat. When you breathe out, some water leaves, and evaporation. And of course, if it's a hotter day and you're outside and in the sun, or you're working out and exercising, you're going to lose more water via sweat and respiration than you would the next day when you stay in the air conditioning or whatever. Again, this is regulated by the hypothalamus, and as soon as the body senses you're low in water, it will release the hormone ADH, anti-diuretic hormone, which will tell your kidneys to save water. So ADH is the prime regulator when it comes to water balance. There are tons of electrolytes in body water, and I want you to focus on sodium and potassium because those are the two involved in nerve impulses, which means if you don't have a good balance of those two, you're not going to be able to send a nerve impulse. More sodium is outside the cells and more potassium is inside cells, and you want it to be that way. Sodium tends to be outside cells, potassium tends to be inside. High levels of potassium can kill you. It shuts your heart off, so you want to keep it inside the cells. When they do lethal injection, that's what they use, potassium chloride. Besides electrolytes, there's also proteins that usually have a negative charge present in the blood. So at that point, you can call them, or they act like electrolytes. And both are going to contribute to the osmolarity of the blood. So if you have a lot of sodium, a lot of protein, a lot of potassium, or any of these other electrolytes, the osmotic pressure is higher and more water is going to want to come to there. Okay, you guys remember osmolarity? It's how much stuff is in the blood. The more stuff, the higher the osmolarity, and the more hypertonic the solution is. Remember, hypertonic means there's a lot of dissolved substances, or more salt if you want to think of it that way. And hypotonic is less dissolved substances than a cell, and it includes things like distilled water or pure water. Okay? Low amount of stuff, low osmolarity, hypotonic solution. Equal, the solution is isotonic, and this is why you give people 0.9% saline solution when you give an IV, because you don't want their blood cells to swell up or burst or shrivel. That kills them, and if cells die, eventually you will. All right, so a little review about osmosis there. So again, water and electrolytes are balanced because of this rules of osmolarity. If the kidney saves sodium, which is an electrolyte, any charged ion is an electrolyte, by moving it from the tubules back into the blood, then water follows and you save water too. If kidneys excrete electrolytes, water follows, so you would lose more water. Wherever the salts go, or the electrolytes go, the water goes. That is the key on how the kidneys balance electrolytes. It controls whether it saves or excretes electrolytes, and water just follows. Remember the hormone aldosterone? Aldosterone makes you save sodium, so indirectly it makes you save water. So high levels of aldosterone, you increase blood volume and it increases your blood pressure. The kidneys also play a role in balancing pH. If you are in acidosis or your pH has gone down for any reason, the kidneys will excrete hydrogen ion. Okay, it will excrete acid, and your urine will become more acidic, and sometimes you can even kind of feel it on days where, or when you work out, especially anaerobically, or you're a bodybuilder, you can produce a lot of lactic acid, and that acid will, to get rid of it, you will breathe faster and you will pee out the acid, and the urine will actually burn, or it could burn because of the acid content. During alkalosis, if your pH goes up, it gets more basic, the urinary system can react by the kidneys will get rid of bicarbonate. Okay, that's your body's buffer, and getting rid of that will bring your pH back down and you'll get back to homeostasis. Remember, your body wants to be at 7.4 because that's where your enzymes work the best, and without that, it can cause a lot of damage. All right, in lab this week, you're going to have a chance to do urinalysis, which is basically pee in a cup and dip a strip with a whole bunch of little colored sections on it there. Each one is sensitive to a different component that could be found in urine, and they turn colors based on how much is there, and you can compare it to a color strip either on the jar itself, or if you're in lab, we have a machine that will measure it. There's also a picture here, and you will compare your strip to the colors and it will tell you what's in your urine. So you should have no glucose, or very, very little, but if that square turns green and then brown, you know you have glucose in your urine. Bilirubin, you should have very little of that, and it tells you how much you have. Ketones, you should not have any ketones in your urine. That can indicate you're diabetic, for example. Specific gravity measures the amount of dissolved substances, and you should have a range between 1.005 and 1.05, so you might be anywhere along this range. Essentially, if you have lots of dissolved substances in your urine, it means it's concentrated and you're probably dehydrated. Okay? You should not have blood in your urine. There might be a trace if you're menstruating, though. pH should range between 4 and 8, so it's pretty unusual for it to be up here, 8 or above. Urine is generally acidic. 5 is about the average. Protein, you should not have any or very tiny amounts of protein in your diet. Sometimes a high protein diet, you might get a trace. But otherwise, if you have protein in your diet, you're looking at kidney failure type thing. Urobilogen is another thing that shouldn't be in your urine very high. This is a breakdown product of your liver. And again, your liver should be taking care of this, so it shouldn't show up in your urine. And you should not have nitrates. That can indicate protein wasting disease. And leukocytes are white blood cells. You might have a little bit, especially if you are fighting off an infection, but a high amount might indicate a serious infection, like a UTI, urinary tract infection, and then the doctor might say, oh, you need some antibiotics to get rid of that type thing. Okay. If you are an online student, you got sent home a strip, and you can test your own urine if you want and see what's in it. We're not medical doctors, though. If something looks weird, you should go see your own doctor. So in summary, your kidneys help maintain water, electrolyte, and pH balance, as well as get rid of nitrogen waste and other toxins. This helps make sure your blood pressure stays normal and your proteins are working correctly. So really, the kidneys are quite amazing organs, and you never feel them. All right, so that's the end of Unit 14. Don't forget to read your reading assignment. Check out the associated Quizlets, your lab manual, and the websites if you need more information. And as always, feel free to email me if you have a question.